The wind was a thief on the high desert range, stealing warmth from the skin and words from the mouth. It scoured the arid expanse of baked earth and brittle scrub, a constant, whining presence that made the flags on the distant berms snap and dance like frantic creatures. This was a place of precision, of violent mathematics, where fractions of an inch and whispers of barometric pressure decided between a celebrated hit and an anonymous miss. In the middle of this uniformed world of hardened professionals stood Evelyn Reed, an island of soft civilian attire in a sea of camouflage. Her charcoal blazer and sensible flats seemed an affront to the grit and gravitas of the Marine Corps Advanced Sniper Course demonstration. She was a consultant, a data analyst from a tech firm contracted to evaluate the performance of new atmospheric sensors, and she looked as out of place as a songbird in a nest of eagles. Her presence had not gone unnoticed. Gunnery Sergeant Croft, a man whose neck was as thick as his prejudices, watched her from the firing line. He was the king of this domain, the range master, a gatekeeper of the sacred art of long-range marksmanship. To him, Evelyn was an interruption, a footnote in a day meant to showcase his unit's lethality to the visiting four-star, Admiral Hayes. Croft saw her jotting notes on a tablet and scoffed internally. What could a woman in office clothes possibly understand about the spirit level of a rifle, the dope on a 1,200-meter shot, the prayer you whisper just before the sear breaks? He saw her quiet, unassuming posture not as dignity, but as weakness. He saw her focus not as professional diligence, but as timid detachment. He was a man who measured worth in decibels and deployments, and she registered on neither scale. Admiral Hayes, a stark contrast to Croft, stood with an air of quiet authority, his gaze sweeping over the proceedings with an intelligence that missed nothing. He noted the gunnery sergeant's chest-puffing performance, and he noted the civilian woman who seemed utterly absorbed in her work, oblivious to the machismo swirling around her. There was a story brewing in the tension between the loud, arrogant NCO and the quiet, focused woman, and the Admiral was a patient reader. Evelyn felt the stares. She'd felt them her whole life. The condescension, the dismissal, the judgment based on a shell she had no control over. It was a familiar weight, one she had learned to carry with a straight spine. She focused on the numbers, the data streaming from the sensors her company had installed. Wind speed 18 miles per hour, gusting to 25. Angle, variable, shifting from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock. Temperature, 92 degrees Fahrenheit. Mirage was a shimmering beast rising from the valley floor. She recorded it all, her mind a silent, efficient processor. She was here to do a job, not to win a popularity contest. But on a Marine Corps sniper range, sometimes you are forced to do both. The demonstration proceeded with the crisp, percussive rhythm of military precision. Marines, lean and sun-cured, sent rounds downrange with practiced ease, hitting targets at 1,000, 1,200, and 1,500 meters. Each successful impact was met with a satisfying thwack relayed over the speakers and a self-congratulatory nod from Gunny Croft, who narrated the event like a carnival barker selling feats of strength. He strutted behind the firing line, his voice a gravelly roar that carried over the wind. "You see, Admiral," he boomed, ensuring everyone within 50 feet could hear. "This isn't like shooting video games. This is an art form. It takes grit, instinct. Something you can't learn from a damn computer screen." He let his eyes slide pointedly over to Evelyn, who was cross-referencing the shooter's reported wind calls with her own sensor data. A few of the younger Marines, eager to curry favor with the gunny, chuckled on cue. The Admiral's face remained impassive, his eyes betraying nothing. Evelyn didn't look up from her tablet. Her fingers continued to move across the screen, tracing lines of data, her expression unchanged. This apparent indifference was a grain of sand in the oyster of Croft's ego, irritating him, compelling him to produce a pearl of pure spite. He wanted a reaction. He wanted her to look flustered, intimidated, to shrink under the weight of his authority. Her calm was a quiet act of defiance he could not tolerate. He saw her as a representative of a world he despised, a world of theories and simulations, a world that threatened to devalue the hard-won, gut-level knowledge he prided himself on. In his mind, she was a symbol of the encroaching, sterile clean tech world that had no place in the dirt and blood of his profession. He decided, in a moment of sublime arrogance, that he would expose her. He would peel back her corporate composure and reveal the clueless civilian beneath for all to see. The final rifle in the demonstration was the main event, the XM400, an experimental platform chambered in the monstrous 408 JTAC. It was a weapon designed to push the very boundaries of ballistic possibility, a cannon that masqueraded as a rifle. The designated marksman fired, and with the help of a spotter, managed a spectacular 2,500-meter hit, eliciting murmurs of approval from the assembled VIPs. As the applause died down, Croft saw his opening. It was perfect. The formal part of the demonstration concluded, and the VIPs began to mingle, inspecting the weaponry laid out on the benches. Admiral Hayes was deep in conversation with the program manager for the XM400. Croft, however, had only one target in his sights. He swaggered over to Evelyn, his shadow falling over her tablet. The nearby conversations quieted as the Marines sensed the impending confrontation. "Enjoying the show, ma'am?" Croft began, his voice a slick veneer of politeness over a core of pure mockery. Evelyn looked up, her gaze steady. "The equipment is performing within expected parameters. Your shooters are very skilled." Her answer was professional, devoid of emotion. It wasn't the answer he wanted. "Skill?" Croft chuckled, a harsh, grating sound. "Yeah, I suppose you could call it that. Tell you what." He gestured with a thumb toward the XM400, still cooling on its bipod. "All this data you're collecting. It's just numbers, right? Why don't you get a feel for the real thing? See what it's all about?" The invitation was a trap, laid bare for everyone to see. It was a public challenge designed to humiliate. If she refused, she was a coward. If she accepted, she would inevitably fail, proving his point about pencil-pushing civilians. A wave of uncomfortable silence washed over the onlookers. Even the Admiral paused his conversation, turning his head slightly to observe the unfolding drama. Evelyn looked from Croft's sneering face to the rifle. It was a magnificent, terrible piece of engineering. She knew its specifications intimately. The custom-milled 30-inch barrel, the advanced muzzle brake designed to tame its ferocious recoil, the state-of-the-art optical package that cost more than a new car. She also knew that for a novice, trying to fire it would be like trying to tame a lightning strike. She could have said no. She could have cited regulations, or simply stated it wasn't her job. It would have been the easy, sensible path. But as she looked at Croft, at the smug certainty on his face, a lifetime of being underestimated, of being judged and dismissed, coalesced into a single point of cold, quiet resolve. "I'd be interested to see its performance metrics firsthand," she said, her voice even. "Thank you for the offer, Gunnery Sergeant." The smirk on Croft's face widened into a predatory grin. He had her. "My pleasure, ma'am," he boomed, turning to address the now rapt audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, our consultant from wherever wants to try her hand." He clapped his hands together with theatrical enthusiasm. "Well, we can't have her shooting at some baby target, can we? Johnson, get on the horn with control. Tell them to set up a new target. Let's go." 4,700 meters. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. 4,700 meters. Nearly 3 miles. It was a ludicrous distance, well beyond the weapon's effective range, beyond the confirmed world record, beyond sanity. It was a distance chosen not as a challenge, but as a punchline. The shot was impossible. The Marines exchanged looks of disbelief and pity. This wasn't just a challenge anymore. It was a public execution of her credibility. Gunny," one of the younger sergeants stammered. "The target berms don't even go out that far. We'd be aiming at the mountain, then paint a 10 by 10 square on the mountain." Croft snapped, his eyes flashing. "Make it happen!" He was high on his own power, drunk on the attention. The Admiral watched the exchange, his brow furrowed. He could intervene, shut this down as unprofessional and dangerous. But something in Evelyn's posture held him back. There was no fear in her eyes. There was no panic. There was only a profound and unsettling calm. She walked toward the firing bench, her movements fluid and deliberate. The crowd parted for her as if she were walking to a scaffold. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but she seemed not to notice. She placed her tablet on the bench beside the rifle and took a moment, not to look at the weapon, but to look downrange, toward the featureless brown mountain that was now her target. Croft came up beside her, leaning in conspiratorially. "All right, ma'am, it's simple," he began, launching into a deliberately confusing and condescending briefing. "You just gotta account for spin drift, the Coriolis effect, which is the Earth spinning under the bullet, you see. Then there's your ballistic coefficient, density, altitude. Just get the crosshairs on the target and squeeze. Easy day," he finished with a wink. He expected her to be overwhelmed, to see her confidence finally crack. But Evelyn simply nodded, her gaze fixed on the mountain. "Thank you, Gunnery Sergeant," she said quietly. "I'll be sure to keep that in mind." Then the woman from the tech firm vanished. In her place stood someone else entirely. The shift was subtle, but for the trained eyes in the crowd, it was seismic. Her posture changed, her shoulders squaring as she settled onto the stool behind the rifle. She didn't just sit, she integrated herself with the bench, becoming a stable, living part of the firing platform. Her hands, which had been holding a stylus moments before, moved with a startling, innate familiarity. She didn't grab the rifle, she made contact with it, her fingers tracing the lines of the stock, the receiver, the bolt assembly. It was a lover's touch, a surgeon's assessment. She ignored Croft completely. He was just noise now, static on the periphery of her senses. She pulled her tablet closer, her fingers flying across the screen. But she wasn't checking emails or running diagnostics. She opened a piece of software no one there had ever seen before, a custom-built advanced ballistic application. On one side of the screen, a real-time data feed from her company's sensors populated a dizzying array of variables: pressure, temperature, humidity, wind vectors at 10-meter altitude increments. On the other side was a complex firing solution calculator. She began to input data, her fingers a blur. Bullet weight, 350 grains. Muzzle velocity, as tested on this specific rifle that morning, which she had quietly downloaded from the range's server, 3,525 feet per second. Ballistic coefficient, 112 G1. Her movements were economical and precise. She picked up a Kestrel wind meter and held it up, taking her own reading and comparing it to the network sensors, noting the microclimate differences right at the firing line. The small crowd of smirking onlookers grew quiet. The chuckles died in their throats. They were watching something they didn't understand. A few of the more experienced snipers in the group recognized the ritual. This wasn't a civilian fumbling with a piece of hardware. This was a master preparing her canvas. This was the meticulous, obsessive process of a true long-range shooter. Croft stood a few feet away, his arms crossed, the smug look on his face slowly beginning to curdle into confusion. He had expected fumbling, questions, maybe even tears. He was getting a silent, intensive masterclass in ballistics that was far beyond his own understanding. The silence on the range became heavy, thick with anticipation. Evelyn's world shrank to the size of the tablet's screen, and the view through the spotting scope she had placed beside her. Her mind was a whirlwind of silent calculations, a place where physics and instinct merged. 4,700 meters. 47 kilometers. The flight time would be immense, over 8 seconds. In that time, the bullet would become a plaything of the heavens. It would climb to an apogee of hundreds of feet, an invisible arc against the blue canvas of the sky, before beginning its long, final descent. She murmured the variables to herself, a quiet litany. Coriolis effect at this latitude, for an 8.2-second time of flight, will cause a horizontal drift of 31 inches to the right. Spin drift. Another 26 inches right. She typed the compensation into her program. Wind is the real problem. Her sensors showed a crosswind from the right, averaging 18 miles per hour near the firing line, but the data from the higher altitude sensors showed it shearing, dropping to 10 miles per hour midway and then gusting to 20 miles per hour again near the target. It was a river of air with complex, invisible currents. She couldn't just hold for the wind, she had to account for its entire journey. She built a segmented wind model in her software, inputting different values for different stages of the bullet's flight path. The final hold-off was staggering. The required elevation adjustment was over 200 mils, more than the internal travel of the scope itself. She knew this. The engineers who designed the scope knew this. But she knew something they didn't. She reached into her blazer pocket and retrieved a small, custom-machined steel wedge, no bigger than a domino. With a few deft movements, she loosened the scope rings and inserted the wedge beneath the rear of the scope mount, physically tilting the entire optic downward to give it the extreme angle it needed. It was a field expedient, a trick of the trade for extreme long-range shooting, something you don't learn in a manual. A low whistle escaped from one of the recon Marines watching. He knew what he had just seen. Finally, she addressed the rifle itself. She leaned into the optic, the rubber eye-cup sealing against her skin, shutting out the world. The image that resolved was a wavering, blurry patch of brown mountain, distorted by heat and distance. Finding a 10-foot square on that canvas would be impossible by sight alone. She synced her tablet to the scope via Bluetooth. The advanced optic projected a digital reticle over the optical image, and using the data from her tablet, she could offset the reticle to a precise point in space. She wasn't aiming at the target. She was aiming at a patch of empty sky high above it and far to the left, the point where she needed to launch the bullet for gravity and wind to deliver it to its destination. The final solution appeared on her tablet screen. Elevation, 2,173 mils up. Windage, 182 mils left. She took a deep, centering breath. Her world was now the reticle, her heartbeat, and the whisper of the wind. The moment arrived. Time seemed to stretch and thin, drawing out into a crystalline silence that enveloped the firing line. The only sounds for Evelyn were the faint thrum of the blood in her ears and the whisper of her own breathing. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. The technique was as natural to her as walking. She had drilled it 10,000 times in a different life, in a different uniform, in places she no longer allowed her memory to visit. Her finger found the trigger. It was not a hook, not a pull. It was a conscious point of contact, a sensor. She applied pressure, not in pounds, but in ounces, a steady, linear increase. The world through the high-powered scope was a shimmering, dancing mess of mirage. She wasn't fighting it, she was reading it, using the waves of heat to judge the last-moment shifts in the wind. In her mind's eye, she could see the bullet's entire journey. The explosive birth from the muzzle, the violent stabilization as it bit into the air, the long, graceful climb into the thinner atmosphere, the apex of its trajectory where it hung for a microsecond between ascent and descent, and the final, brutal plummet back to Earth. Her focus was absolute, a singularity of will and purpose. Croft watched, his jaw tight, a cold knot of dread twisting in his gut. This was not the fumbling failure he had engineered. This was something else. This was a terrifying display of competence that he could not comprehend. The Admiral leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, missing nothing. He saw the control in her posture, the economy of her motion, the almost zen-like stillness before the storm. The rifle roared. It was not a crack, but a deep, thoracic boom that seemed to shake the very foundations of the range. The recoil kicked back like a mule, a wave of kinetic energy that would have shattered the collarbone of an unprepared shooter. But Evelyn's body, anchored to the bench, took the force as a single, solid unit, absorbing and dissipating the violence without breaking form. She flowed with it, her eye never leaving the scope, her form a testament to perfectly ingrained fundamentals. For a split second, the vapor trail of the massive bullet was visible, a faint white line streaking into the vast, indifferent blue sky, tracing the beginning of its impossible 8-second odyssey. Then it was gone. And the range was plunged into a profound, ringing silence, broken only by the ceaseless, thieving wind. An eternity passed in 8 seconds. Every eye on the range was either glued to the high-definition monitor displaying the target feed or staring intently at Evelyn, who remained perfectly still, looking through her scope, as if watching the outcome unfold in real time. The air was thick with a mixture of disbelief, hope, and schadenfreude. Most were waiting for the inevitable confirmation of a miss, the moment when Croft's cruel joke would land and the tension would break into awkward laughter. Croft himself was practically holding his breath, his face pale and slick with a fine sheen of sweat. He needed to be right. His entire sense of self, his authority, his place in the world, depended on that bullet landing harmlessly in the dirt. The voice from the target control tower crackled over the PA system, hesitant and laced with static. Range control. We're looking. Stand by. The pause stretched on, each second a turn of a screw tightening the tension on the range. Some of the Marines started to fidget. A miss this bad didn't even require a check. You would have seen the dust cloud from the impact miles away. The lack of an immediate, no impact, was itself a mystery. Then the voice from the tower came again, no longer hesitant, but sharp with adrenaline and pure, unadulterated shock. Hit! My God, we have a hit! I repeat, confirmed hit on steel! A collective, involuntary sound erupted from the crowd, not a cheer, but a raw gasp of astonishment. It was a sound of reality being violently reconfigured. It was impossible. It couldn't have happened. But it had. The monitor flickered, and the operators zoomed in on the distant target. There, on the freshly painted white square nearly 3 miles away, was a dark, unmistakable smudge. A fresh crater in the steel plate. Jaws hung slack. Marines, men who had seen combat, men who had performed incredible feats of marksmanship themselves, simply stared, their minds unable to process the data their eyes were giving them. They looked from the monitor to Evelyn, who was now calmly opening the rifle's bolt and clearing the chamber, her expression as placid as if she had just finished a crossword puzzle. Croft's face collapsed. The color drained from it, leaving a pasty, chalk-white mask of horror. No, he whispered, the sound swallowed by the wind. No way. Check it again. Run the cameras back. It's a fluke. A ricochet. Impossible, but he knew. Everyone knew. A fluke doesn't land dead center on a 10-foot plate from 4,700 meters away. That wasn't luck. That was divine intervention, or a level of skill so profound it might as well have been. Admiral Hayes broke the spell. He moved with a purpose that parted the stunned crowd like a ship's bow through water. He did not spare a single glance for the crumbling gunnery Sergeant Croft. His eyes were fixed on Evelyn. He walked directly to the firing bench where she was methodically cleaning the bolt face of the XM400 with a small cloth she'd produced from her blazer pocket. His face, normally a mask of stern authority, was etched with a profound and undisguised awe. "Ma'am," he began, his voice low and filled with a respect that bordered on reverence. "In 35 years of service, I have seen things that defy explanation. I have never, ever, seen anything like that. That was not a feat of marksmanship. That was a masterpiece." Evelyn finally looked up, meeting his gaze. A faint, weary smile touched her lips. "The rifle performed well, Admiral. The sensor package gave me good data." The humility in her response only deepened the Admiral's astonishment. As she spoke, the recoil from the massive rifle had slightly dislodged the thin silver chain she wore around her neck. It had slipped out from beneath the collar of her blouse. Hanging from it, glinting in the harsh sun, was not a locket or a pendant. It was a small, tarnished, 5-pointed star, nested against a single, standard-issue dog tag. The Admiral's eyes, trained to notice every detail, locked onto it. He stopped, his gaze sharpening with sudden, dawning recognition. He had seen that medal awarded. He had read the citations. He knew the stories, the legends whispered in the classified briefing rooms of SOCOM. He looked from the medal back to her face, seeing her now not as a civilian consultant, but as if through a new lens. The quiet demeanor, the unnerving calm under pressure, the impossible skill. It all clicked into place with the force of a rifle bolt locking home. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping even further, now meant only for her. "May I?" he asked, his finger hovering over the metal. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He gently lifted the chain. He didn't need to read the name on the tag. He knew. "Gunnery Sergeant Evelyn Reed," he said, the name both a question and a statement. He paused, letting the weight of the name settle in the air between them. "First Reconnaissance Battalion. They called you the Ghost of Ramadi." The name hung in the air, electric and heavy. Ghost of Ramadi. It was not a call sign, it was a legend. A myth born in the bloody, labyrinthine streets of a war a decade past. A sniper who had operated with such stealth and lethal precision that the enemy had believed she was a supernatural spirit, a phantom who dealt death from the shadows. The stories were the stuff of Marine Corps lore, whispered with a mix of fear and reverence, but the ghost's true identity had always been a closely guarded secret, lost in the classified archives of the war. Until now. The few recon Marines in the crowd who were old enough to remember the stories felt a jolt, as if from a cattle prod. Their eyes widened, looking at Evelyn as if seeing her for the first time. The quiet woman in the blazer. The data analyst. It was her. The pieces fell into place with breathtaking clarity. The impossible shot was no longer impossible, it was simply a confirmation. Gunnery Sergeant Croft, who had been standing frozen in a state of shock, heard the name. His face, already pale, turned a shade of sickly gray. The Ghost of Ramadi wasn't just a sniper, she was a decorated war hero, a recipient of the Silver Star for valor, awarded for an action where she had held off an entire enemy platoon single-handedly for 12 hours to protect a wounded fireteam. Croft had just publicly mocked, harassed, and tried to humiliate a living legend of the very institution he claimed to serve. The Admiral let the medal rest back on her chest and straightened up. The awe on his face was now replaced by a cold, hard fury. He turned slowly, deliberately to face Croft. His voice was no longer quiet. It was the voice of command, as sharp and cold as glacial ice. "Gunnery Sergeant Croft," he said, each word a hammer blow. "You will report to my aid. Now. You and I are going to have a very long, very detailed conversation about military bearing, professional conduct, and the profound lack of respect you just showed to a fellow Marine, and a recipient of the Silver Star." Croft flinched as if struck. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He just stood there, a monument to his own arrogance, shattered by a single bullet and a tarnished piece of silver. The Admiral turned back to Evelyn. The ice in his voice melted away, replaced by a deep, resonant warmth. "Gunnery Sergeant Reed," he said, the title a restoration of her true identity. "It is an honor." The other Marines on the range, the ones who had chuckled at Croft's jokes, now stood rigid, their posture ramrod straight. Their faces were a mixture of shame and a powerful, dawning respect that went beyond mere admiration for a good shot. It was the respect for a warrior. Evelyn simply offered a small, quiet nod. She had not come here for this. She had not sought accolades or wanted to relive a past she had tried so hard to leave behind. She had only wanted to do her job. But when challenged, when her dignity was put on the line, she had responded in the only way she knew how. She didn't use words. She didn't resort to anger. She let her actions speak for her. And on this day, on this windswept desert range, a single, perfectly placed shot had spoken with more thunderous clarity than any voice could ever hope to achieve, delivering a justice that was as pure and undeniable as the laws of physics that had guided it home.